Just 2, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, it is 3 1. Left land, swim west, copy. 3 1. Crossing 2 1. Crossing at 2 4 is
Hello and welcome to the Blueskies podcast. I'm PR Ganapathy, your host.
Just 70, Roger, report type southeast, Mirage, 54, midway, and field selected.
It is a real delight today to speak to quite a legendary officer of the Indian Air Force, Air Marshal Raghu Nambiar. Air Marshal Nambiar was commissioned in 1981 into the fighter stream of the Indian Air Force and retired almost 38 years later, 2019, 5,200 hours of military aviation time under his belt. He was an experimental test pilot, commanded Mirage Squadron number 1 Squadron, was Commandant of AST, and his last 2 postings were as CNC Eastern Air Command and then CNC Western Air Command. He's also known, of course, for his legendary exploits during the Kargil operations. But, there are lots of aspects of his career that are very fascinating, ranging from his test flying to the work that he did on the Tejas LCA to some of the work that he did in collaborating with the Israelis. So we're going to have a fascinating conversation with him today. But first things first, welcome to the program, sir, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us.
Thank you, Ghana. It's a pleasure being with you this morning.
Pleasure's mine, sir. Thank you. So, sir, we love to get to know our guests. So, just love to know where you grew up and what your motivation was to join the service, and what was that initial journey like? Which aircraft did you train on? Any interesting experiences or anecdotes during your initial years in the service?
Uh, Ghana, thank you for having me on your program. I am an Air Force brat, something just like you. My father was in the Air Force. He was a navigator. He primarily flew Liberators and Canberras.
Fascinating. Wow.
I was brought up as typical for any Air Force brat in an Air Force camp, Pune, Barrackpur, Nagpur, some places where I have been. And naturally, operating in a flying environment with a lot of aircrafts buzzing around, high speed jets, the sound of uh, jets almost prevalent all over. I think it was but natural that I would desire a career in the fighters.
Mm-hmm. And did you join NDA or direct entry?
No, I did join NDA. I completed my schooling till the 11th standard, various schools all over India, and then joined NDA way back in 1977. And that was about the time my father retired as well. So
Okay.
I have been almost continuously in the Air Force till I demitted office about 2 years ago.
Right, right. Great. And which aircraft did you do your basic training on? I presume HT2 and then the Iskra, Kiran.
Exactly, that was the standard routine of those days. Primarily flew the uh, HT2s in the first stage at Bidar. That was for about 6 months. Graduated to the Kirans, flew that for about 70 hours, and then got my commission and wings in about a year after leaving NDA. That was in June 1981. And then I flew the Iskras for about 100 hours at Hakimpet. It's at this stage that we were, you know, uh, split up into 2 batches, the fighter people, that is. Some of us went to Tezpur and some of us went to Kalaikunda for hunter training.
So the Western versus the Eastern stream kind of.
Not exactly that. It was probably more to do with the number of people available. So, in each course. So, I went to Kalaikunda, flew the Hunters for about 30 hours, and thereafter, bypassing Tezpur, where the MiG 21s were located, six of us were on a experimental basis sent directly to Pune to fly the MiG 21 BIS, which at that point in time, in 1982 June, was perhaps the best aircraft in the Indian Air Force as far as
Right,
fighters
right,
were.
right. Which squadron was that? So 21 squadron was that?
That was right. 21 Squadron was the training squadron, and we were the tail end Charlies of 21 Squadron, six of us. And we remained in the squadron for about 4 years, trying to somehow get airborne. Flying came very difficult. It was with a lot of difficulty that we got to fly, primarily because the squadron had many other roles as well. And the emphasis was so much on flight safety that we were only allowed to fly one sortie a day. And that one sortie a day became about maybe one sortie in a week. And things stretched from one day to the other. And we actually landed up with very little flying, becoming day ops in about 4 years' time.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that is a long time. We spoke to a couple of guests earlier who were also there, maybe around the same time. Later, Commodore Sahota and then Pradeep Mule. I don't know if you overlapped with either of them.
Air Commodore Sahota was at that time Wing Commander Sahota. He was my commanding officer.
You just see, oh,
And
okay, lovely.
and I very fondly recollect him. He was my first commanding officer of a fighter squadron. Very fond recollections of him.
That's always a special, yeah. So after that, after becoming day ops on the BIS, where did you go?
Uh, by about in 4 years' time, by about 1985, I had become day ops on the BIS, and then uh, I was posted to Bhuj. Bhuj was, as compared to Pune, was the backup beyond. This was to 15 Squadron, the Lancers. I spent about 4 months in that squadron. I got my fully ops, and then by the time I had achieved my fully ops, a posting signal was in hand, posting me to Gwalior to 7th Squadron for the Mirage 2000, which had just been inducted about 6 months ago.
Oh, fascinating. That must have been very exciting to hear because it was the cutting edge aircraft in the Air Force.
Exactly. I felt like I was blessed, going from the MiG 21 base to the Mirage 2000 was like an amazing time. Uh, Extremely excited because the aircraft was very modern and remains to this day one of the major combat capabilities of the Indian Air Force.
Yes, yes. So we're going to deep dive in the Mirage, but I just want to ask you about what the flying environment was like in Bhuj. When I look at it on the map, you're so close to the border, and it must be really, uh, a very interesting kind of a place to be in, with the border being so close and being on alert and things like that. So just if you could spend a few minutes telling us what it's like to be there.
Bhuj is I would say, the back of Beyond, but Bhuj was slightly more sophisticated than Nalia, which was the back and back of Beyond. Nalia was further to the west of Bhuj. Probably Nalia was. Nalia just had in fact, it didn't have a railway connection at that time. And to travel between Bhuj and Nalia, you required to be uh, taking a taxi. That was the condition we were in at that time. Bhuj was fairly sophisticated. This was before the earthquake. And we did have some sort of excitement in Bhuj in terms of seeing civilians and there were a large amount of donkeys floating around, wild asses. Uh,
Right, right.
the flying environment was excellent. We had visibility, cavok conditions, that is cloud and visibility all okay, more than 8 kilometers at any time. We flew our pants off. It was really exciting flying at low level over the run of Kutch, and though the border was in the near vicinity, it wasn't a problem avoiding it. It was very clearly demarcated, and there was just no issue about sort of feeling hemmed in. Uh, to the south was Jamnagar, which was the second diversion, and I think the flying environment, the squadron itself, we had a number of youngsters there, and we had a great time. So I think in all, Bhuj, the flying environment was excellent.
Hmm. And given the proximity to the border, was there kind of, and always a radar monitoring? And did you ever see any tracks? And was anybody ever scrambled or alerted, or any of those interesting things ever happened when you were there?
No, that didn't happen, Gana, not in my time. We used to be in on ORP. Most of the times, our squadron used to man the ORP every alternate week. We had a base radar, a P-18, which is even at that point in time, an ancient Russian radar operating the VUHF band. Uh, it used to be located at Bhuj itself. We had other radars around, but I think all in all, the radar coverage was good. But given the fact that the terrain was absolutely flat as a pancake, and therefore there was no excitement, and at least as far as the uh, border was concerned. We never got scrambled even once. I do not recollect even once being scrambled.
Okay. Great, sir. So coming to the Mirage, sir, just tell us a little more about the aircraft. You're the first Mirage pilot I'm interviewing, so just love to know about the thinking, the design, why we bought it, what roles we acquired it for, and what it was like to fly. So just tell us as much of the Mirage as you have time for.
Uh, the Mirage was sort of a knee-jerk purchase to compensate the Indian Air Force for the fact that the Pakistanis had acquired the F-16, which happened in about 1982. Uh, Immediately, the IAF was in a bit of a tizzy because the F-16 introduced technologies into this arena which we did not have. It brought in advanced air-to-air combat missiles. It brought in look down radar, pulse Doppler radar, and with the capabilities to be in the sky for a long period of time. It introduced fly by wire, excellent cockpit visibility, and so many other features that the aircrafts of the Indian Air Force really lacked. Uh, the immediate action was to purchase the MiG 23 MF, which was probably not up to the mark or optimized solution for countering the F-16. And the second action was to procure the Mirage 2000. So the Mirage 2000 was primarily brought in as counter to the F-16. It was bought for the air defense role, and all the armament and the number of weapon system that we procured with it were essentially focused towards the uh, air-to-air role. We had BVR missiles for the first time
Oh,
introduced. These were semi-active BVR missiles, so to speak. This was the S530D, and it came along with the Magic 2 missile, which was a very potent air-to-air missile of its time. Uh, Along with the aircraft also came along a smattering of air-to-ground capability. We had procured for the first time the laser-guided bomb. This was the 1000 kg Matra Arcol bomb, and a Patrick laser designation pod, which allowed us to drop the Arcol 1000 kg bomb by day only.
mhm.
Uh, Along with them also came the Beluga and also the BAP 100 anti-runway bomb. So these are but these were all very small in number and were not really sort of did not get us the capability that we finally we would decide with the Mirage 2000 as far as the ground attack capabilities were concerned.
And on the air-to-air side, these were a lot of new this thing. So was there also a lot of tactics development that needed to necessarily happen to be able to exploit the aircraft from the way in which we'd been currently training and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. The tactics are a function mainly of the aircraft capability and also of the capability of the weapon system that it carries. And given the fact that we now had uh, semi-active beyond visual range missiles as well as very potent short-range Magic 2s, which was an all aspect missile, unlike the Magic 1, which could probably only be fired in the tail quarters. Given this fact, there was a dramatic requirement to maneuver in a particular fashion if you were to stay safe from the Magic 2. And this called for a total revamp of the tactics. And I do believe, given the fact that we had this capability, I think we put our thinking caps on in Gwalior, and many of uh, the people there had sort of thought this through. Some of them were highly qualified TAC-D staff and such like, who sort of worked out graphically what are the sort of capabilities that the maneuver that the aircraft should perform to exploit this missile, as well as stay safe from an opponent which was carrying a similar type of missile. That was the F-16. So there's a lot of work going on both on the ground, trying to work out on paper what we should be doing, and then thereafter in the air, working out how it would be exploited. For the first time, we had what I mentioned earlier, an all aspect air to air missile, and that gave us enormous capabilities.
So, what was it like to fly, sir? It was the first fly-by-wire aircraft, I think, in the Indian Air Force, and you were coming from the McBis, so must have been quite a change for you to fly this aircraft with. Did it have a lot of glass in the cockpit, or and what was it like to fly?
The primarily difference which I felt when I changed over from the BIS to the Mirage was, firstly, the controls were delightful. The aircraft sort of was a pilot's dream come true. It had a wonderful autopilot, which was very capable of flying the aircraft within very tight margins, much unlike what was available on the BIS.
The same autopilot that's used in the Airbus, I was told. Is that right?
I understand it is the same autopilot, and even in a fighter with such capable performance figures, it used to maintain about plus minus 10 feet in the altitude hold mode,
Wow.
which was like a dream come true. You could sort of accelerate from, say, point 0.5 to 1.5 mark, and the autopilot would probably put you up or down by just about 10 feet in this whole
My
process.
goodness.
The aircraft was, you know, it had so-called super cruise, in the sense at 10,000 feet in dry power, it used to go supersonic.
Whoa.
That was something which was remarkable. Uh,
Mm.
the fly-by-wire made sure that the handling qualities were amazing throughout the flight envelope. The aircraft could be really turned around in a jiffy. Half roll was possible within about 2,500 to 3,000 feet of height loss. Uh, in all, a very delightful aircraft. The fly-by-wire ensured that your rate of onset of G was tremendous. We had early instances of G lock happening in our squadron, and many of us used to come out of the cockpit with a neck pain because of the large onset of G, which was caused by jerking the controls if you were in a tight situation.
Right, right.
Oh, we
Wow.
used to do combat, amazing interests, in the sense that, we were we could see each other's helmets and even notice who was the pilot if he took his mask off. That is the sort of distance at which combat used to take place. Much
Wow.
unlike what was the sort of one versus one combat that we used to practice in other fleets. Uh, the aircraft radar, as well as the presentation of the data which was being generated by the aircraft, both on the head-up display as well as on the head-down display. We only had a 4 by 4 inch glass head-down display. Was amazing. And uh, what was very interesting was the aircraft every 6 months to a year used to go in for a software upgrade, which
Aha.
sort of improved the aircraft and got it more capabilities as the years went by. The aircraft initially came with what was called Standard 1, SH1. And by the time I left the squadron in 1990, the aircraft had sort of upgraded to Standard 5, which brought in electronic warfare, the laser guided capability, new weapons, almost everything which had been contracted for. That came about in about 5 years' time after the first aircraft was delivered. In addition, the initial aircrafts came with a engine which was called the M53-5. This is an extremely fuel efficient engine, and sort of allowed you to have very low bingo fuel figures. Uh,
Uh-huh.
but the aircraft which were contracted for, because we had some requirements of thrust, excess thrust, was the M53-P2 engine, which came subsequently, and the aircrafts were modified at Gwalior, some of them, that is, to take the new engine. The new engine got in about 800 kgs more of dry thrust, thus allowing us to combat without afterburner if required. However, the fuel consumption rates were substantially higher, roughly about 10 to 15% higher than the Dash 5, and therefore the fuel reserve that you had to keep with you had gone up. Uh, but the thrust was really amazing. It was possible to sort of, really throw the aircraft around, and it was like a musical instrument. It played exactly the tune that you wanted.
Visual to for the bridge line. Just 70, Roger, report time southeast, Greenwich, for the midway, and you selected.
Fascinating. Wow. And reliability or serviceability wise, I'm told the Western aircraft were just very, very serviceable and reliable. So you could just keep on flying. Whereas, the Russian aircraft typically needed a lot more inspections and whatnot. Was that your experience in this, Gordon?
Absolutely. The reliability of the aircraft was phenomenal. It was possible to fly it around the clock, and even in a place which is so hostile as Gwalior, where the temperatures regularly went above 50 degrees centigrade on the tarmac. In fact, the tarmac temperature used to exceed 60 degrees on the surface.
Oh,
That was the sort of place it was. Tar used to melt on the MES roads. That was the sort of conditions it was in. But despite that, the Mirage really performed. And what was amazing about the Mirage was it was maintenance friendly. I remember once that there was three aircraft which had required engine changes, uh, and it was possible to do all these three engine changes on one afternoon. and
wow.
and all that it required at the end of this three set of engine changes was a ground run, and the aircraft was good to go. It did not require an air test, unlike the Eastern Fleet, which most of the time spent itself, getting serviced. Like, for example, a MiG-21 would take as many as 3 to 4 days to do one engine change. The MiG-29, we know, took about 5 to 7 days to get an engine change done. All these were like, done in a jiffy. 1.5 hours to 2 hours, all that it required to do something which in the Eastern Fleet could stretch for a week. That was one major advantage. And even if something did go wrong, all it required was you to get the correct spare and push the LRU, that we call, which is what we call the line replaceable unit. All you required was to pull it out from the store or from some other aircraft which was parked in the hangar, push it in. Very little changes were required. There was no requirement to sort of fine tune the equipment being replaced, and you are good to go. That's what made the aircraft so easy to operate, and it has been the aircraft since the 1980s, the go-to aircraft for everything that the Indian Air Force attempted to do. You could be it the operations at Pumalai, be it the operations during the induction of the IPKF, be it the operations in Maldives, be it the Kargil operations, be it Balakot, you would find the Mirage right in front. I mean, we are talking of a period of time of over 30 years where the aircraft has been the go-to aircraft of the Indian Air Force, despite it being fairly small in size. We are under 50 aircrafts. And during this period, we also had the Sukhoi 30 cars, we had the Sukhoi 30 MKIs, and all the other aircraft which the Indian Air Force possessed. Despite that, the aircraft of choice, whenever we required to go harm's way, was the Mirage 2000. The reason for this was it had almost everything which you really required in terms of electronic warfare capability, in terms of weapons, in terms of pilotability, and in terms of maintenance, being maintenance friendly. That the aircraft was available when you required it.
Yeah. And one of the things is that it was one of the few, the first really multi-role aircraft in our Air Force, isn't it? And the ease of for the workload on the pilot was because there were so many roles to perform. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, the aircraft, I wouldn't consider the first true multi-role. The first multi-role aircraft of the Indian Air Force was probably the MiG-21.
Right, of course.
We did everything with it. But I guess the second one was probably the Mirage 2000. It could do everything, and it could do everything well.
Well,
That's most
correct.
important. It was a pilot-friendly aircraft. Weapon aiming was a piece of cake. It When weapon delivery took place, it was very accurate, both at low level as well as at high altitude. The bombing, both using low drag as well as high drag bomb, was spectacular. Whenever we dropped a weapon, be it the Beluga or the LGB or any of the other air to ground weapons, our accuracy levels were excellent. That was one. In addition to which was the ability of the aircraft to lift weight. It could lift as much as 6.5 tons and climb away with it, operating out of and being able to take off before the middle marker, which generally in most airfields is about 1500 meters up the runway.
Wow. Even in hot conditions.
That's right,
Oh,
in Gwalior, and
wow.
at 40 degrees centigrade. That sort of, despite it being a air defense aircraft at the time of its procurement, and it was under the AD Directorate at Air Headquarters, it performed in air to ground exceptionally well. So therefore, the pilot's requirement to be knowledgeable about both roles was a challenge. Uh, it required a lot of effort, and in addition, we had the electronic warfare role, both offensive as well as self-defense. It also had LNT capabilities in terms of the Cyril pod, which it carried for electronic intelligence gathering. It had the Cayman pod, which was used for escort jamming, and it carried the Remora and the ABD 2000. The ABD 2000 was an internal jammer. That came subsequently. The first jammer which we had for self protection was the Remora. Uh, Over the years, as the Mirage aged, it went in for a midlife upgrade, and then we got a new radar. We got in new capabilities. We got in new set of you know instruments and glass cockpit, a new INU with GPS embedded, and then what is now what the Mirage 2000 is not what it was in 1985. Today's Mirage 2000 is so much more capable, so much more user friendly, so much more with all the bells and whistles that you require in a modern aircraft. The electronic warfare especially is truly spectacular. We have got five glasses uh, display systems in the cockpit, four of them head down and one of them head up. So I think you have a tactical level display which is at the head level. We have a left and right MFD, and we have head down display and the head up display today. All of them makes a total of five glass surfaces to get information from.
Hmm. And now it also has air-to-air refueling, so even endurance and things like that are
That came about
really
even
much.
in the earlier Mirage 2000. We were probably the first to get into the air-to-air refueling game. The aircrafts were fully capable of air-to-air refueling when we purchased it from France in 1985. However, we did not procure the refueling probe, which came later and got fitted at Gwalior.
So it could easily be fitted after that.
Exactly. They were all the piping and everything was in place. The lighting system and the electronics required to make air-to-air refueling was all within the cockpit itself. It just required the probe to be fitted, and then we were good to go. We started practicing with the IL-78s operating out of Agra, and air-to-air refueling became absolute normal way of life for the Mirage 2000 fleet. You may recollect even in Balakot, we did air-to-air refueling both with the old Mirages as well as the new Mirages, the upgraded Mirages. All of them did air-to-air refueling on that evening.
Yeah. Any interesting, you know, combat sorties, interesting experiences, sea stories, so to speak, about that aircraft?
Oh yes, I think having been in the fleet for almost 15 years, uh, flying it right from a flying officer's day to I even flew the last sortie as an air marshal. I
Right.
flew a upgraded single seat Mirage 2000 from Srinagar as a part of the Kargil anniversary celebrations in June 2019. Uh, I think the aircraft has a lot of anecdotes and stories to go with it. I fondly recollect one. Uh, on many occasions, the aircraft was such a delight to fly that it gives me goosebumps to think of the good times that I've had
Right.
operating that aircraft. It never let me down even once, though we had our flight safety record was excellent. Even though it was a single seater aircraft, our for the amount of hours we flew and the number of missions that we undertook, our flight safety record was probably way higher and better than all the other fleets of the Indian Air Force even today. That's what I understand from the data available.
Data,
What
right.
is uh, what was really wonderful about the aircraft was its reliability once you got it airborne. I remember taking a detachment to Ambala way back in 2002, and I was commanding the one squadron then, and we had missions which called for all 10 aircraft to be airborne simultaneously, and we achieved it over a period of 10 days continuously. I think it was
Wow.
truly amazing. Even in Kargil, where we did something like 300 missions, I only remember one single abort out of 300, which I think was a
Fascinating.
phenomenal sort of number to play around with. uh, Even the one abort I remember in Ambala in 2002, which I recollect, was for a false warning of a canopy not closed, and for which the aircraft had to taxi back. It just required some minor adjustment to the micro switch, and we were good to go. It's actually not a uh, defect; it was more of an alignment issue of a micro switch. That's about it. I think it was absolutely amazing, and I must give great credit to the technicians and the officers from the maintenance side who made this aircraft happen. Though they came from the MiG-21 backgrounds, there was a sea change in the operating procedures as far as maintenance was concerned. It was very important to forget the way we maintained the MiG-21 and relearn the way maintenance was to be done on a modern jet fighter. Uh, the aircraft came with its own electronic documentation computer system, which allowed the aircraft without requiring a Form 700, which was the traditional way of how we flew in the Indian Air Force. It is just in the last 4 or 5 years that the Indian Air Force has now converted itself to EDOC, where you have, all the aircraft data being stored on a computer and being sort of regenerated for every sortie. The Mirages have been doing it since 1985 using a system called the Jimmy. Uh, we had everything which even what a modern day aircraft like the Rafale has, except perhaps something like the tow decoy or some other new feature or functionality which came about due to the technological obsolescence. The Mirage also has been lucky that it has found itself being equipped and re-equipped with new weapons as the year went by. In the beginning, we only had the French LGB, then we got the Paveway 2 from America, we got the Lightning Pod from Israel, we got the Crystal Mace from Israel, we got the Spice 2000 from Israel, and all of these were integrated on the old Mirage 2000 without us having access to the software code.
Okay.
The source code was not available on the aircraft. But despite this, our people, our technicians, in conjunction with the Israeli equipment manufacturers, managed to sort of integrate these weapon systems by emulation and simulation and all other means, and made them successfully. We not only inducted, we also used it in operations. In almost every occasion, it is performed exceptionally well.
Tremendous. Amazing. And the other thing about your experience is that this wealth of experience that you had on the Mirage, you were able to then transfer to the Tejas and the work that you all did there. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. So, when did test pilot school happen, and what was the thinking behind becoming a test pilot? And you're one of those interesting people who's had a wealth of test flying experience, but also a wealth of operational experience, which is quite rare. Typically, one person goes down one path or the other. Tell us about that, sir.
Traditionally, what used to happen in the Indian Air Force is that at about 6 or 7 years of service, you generally got into the uh, f- became an instructor. You went for FIS to Tambram, and thereafter spent about 2 to 3 years, sometimes 4 years in the south. That is the Hakimpet, Bidar, Dundigal, AFA, or Tambram circuit. And thereafter, when you finished that, you did your staff college, which took away 1 more year. And then some of us actually went into test flying. Uh, I avoided all that, in the sense I was unlucky enough not to get selected for FIS or to FCL. So I remained in the squadron for a protracted period of time. I had sort of had this feeling that probably I was not going anywhere. Probably I was, in the boondocks as far as my morale was concerned.
Right, right.
And it is thus that it so happened that there came a signal that there was a test pilot school selection going on. This is about, and I had about 11 years of service. So I applied for it, went to Bangalore. This was in 1991 January. I appeared for the exam, passed it, and then got selected for the course, which started in May 1991. Uh, this is what happened actually, and therefore I had 11 years of combat flying experience, uh, and my course mates who were with me and who had gone elsewhere were probably with about 4 to 5 or 6 years of experience at that time, having spent most of their years in outside the squadron at Tambram and Hakimpet and other places.
Instructional tenures.
That's
Okay.
right. So that, I think, uh, resulted in probably some advantages to me in terms of the ability to, firstly be fully adept at the aircraft and its capabilities in all its possible roles. And being a test pilot now,
What was TP school like? So what,
oh, TP school
I
was,
know.
it's a very fatiguing environment there. You were required to, I think, but I was absolutely thrilled. Here I was getting a chance to fly so many types of aircraft, so aircraft of so many capabilities. I thoroughly enjoyed my test pilot school tenure, though it had its, uh, you know, uh, uh, how would I put it, anxious moments where you felt that the overload, it was, you're sort of getting overloaded, and you would probably collapse under the sheer weight of the paperwork going on there. And it was definitely very interesting, and you got your I got my thrills doing that course. And thereafter, after having completed the course, uh, I continued to be in AST for about 3 more years, which was probably a year longer than the others of my course were there. This resulted in me, because of my Mirage background, getting naturally, sort of pulled towards the Tejas, which was then under development. These were the early years. The Tejas was just on paper, and we had our opportunities to start interacting with the designers and deciding on many of the systems which are now operational. We got into the cockpit very early. We managed to sort of the cockpit of the LCA at that stage was primarily looking like something like what the Jaguar was, because HAL at that time was producing the Jaguar, and therefore naturally there was a tendency to go the Jaguar way. When we got into the cockpit, we started pushing and pulling things around to get it to what we believe was better, more modern. And there was always this push and pull between the people there. Uh, the designers wanted very little changes because naturally it meant more work, and we on our part felt that these were essential. We felt the head up display presentation, the head down display presentation, and all the others would require some improvement to make it more pilot friendly and more capable. So there was this push and pull. And way back in 1992, we were deputed, we two of us, that is myself and squad leader Uday Shankar. We were the two of Rajiv Kotial had come back from the United States, but he been posted to uh, Pune to do his flight commander tenure, and he had gone for staff college and other things like that. And me and Uday, we were deputed to NFTC to be the first to people in National Flight Test Center. Uh,
Okay.
Subsequent to this, Air Marshal Rajkumar was posted in as our commanding officer, which happened about 6 months later. It just so happened that Air Marshal Joe Verma, who was then the AOP, also was the DCS for some time. And since he was the AOP as well as the DCS, he could decide postings as well as formation of the NFTC. So he sent out a letter from the DCS branch posting us into NFTC, little realizing that he had not kept the third floor, that is the AOP's branch, in the picture. But since he was the AOP at the same time, they had little choice but to follow what he had said. So that's how NFTC was unofficially formed. And me and Uday Shankar, we were full time now with NFTC, uh, and though we continue to though I continue to fly from AST. Uh, I was at that time the STP, and many trials and anything else which used to happen, especially as regard the Mirage 2000, the MiG 23, which Jamie used to be responsible for. I used to be his ferry pilot, taking the MiG 23 from one end of the country to the other.
Okay.
So this is the way it was those days. Wonderful times. Uh, Flew our pants off, flew every possible aircraft that we could get. Unfortunately, I had to suffer an ejection
Yes, I'd love
on a
to hear
Kiran.
about that. So, Anna Kiran, yeah.
That's right.
And
And
you had an FTE with you, a flight
that's
test
right. And
engineer?
I think probably the first time that an FTE is ejected safely. In fact, the first ejection of an FTE, for the first ejection of a non pilot from an Indian Air Force aircraft, to my mind.
Fascinating. Wow.
Visual to Fort Ridgeway. Just need 70, roger, report time southeast, connection, for some midway, and you selected.
What happened? What was the trial you were carrying out, and what happened?
What had happened was that I had got airborne in a Jaguar, a two-seater, along with Uday Shankar in the morning hours. And we had done some work as far as the, what was typically a con training sortie. Came back and landed. And as I got back to the flight line, the OCTSS, that are technical side of the of AST, came up to me and said that there was this Kiran which required a sortie today itself, because it had, otherwise it would be due for a servicing. There was this periodic servicing which had to be undertaken if the aircraft had not flown. So I agreed. I went back to the flight line, changed my gear, and pulled Arvind Sharma out, who was the flight test engineer, and said that he would be occupying the right seat. And we briefed for the sortie, and we got airborne. We were carrying out aerobatics somewhere just south of, also closer to Krishnagiri, when I heard a loud banging noise when I was pulling up for a loop, and looked inside, and I saw my RPM had fallen down, and the aircraft was vibrating excessively. I throttled back immediately, but the vibrations continued, and it looked like I was. It was the aircraft was shaking quite violently. I looked inside. I saw even the JPT rise rapidly. I immediately put off the HP cock, which is something which I think most people don't do in a single engine aircraft, and then attempted a relight. We attempted the first relight, which sort of got going, but the moment the RPM rose to about 35%, the vibrations you start all over again, and we had to put the HP off once again. We attempted this twice, and by which time we were now sort of approaching where we should be the pointed for, we would have to eject. I had also already communicated this to the air traffic control and told them that we have this problem. Our engine is being put off, and we would probably need to eject. So ATC was in the loop, and when the time did come out to eject, I briefed the FT, and blew off my canopy. The moment we blew off the canopy, our probably our intercommunication lead snapped,
Hmm.
and so even though I was yelling at him to now eject, he probably could not hear me.
Oh my. Okay.
And both of us had our masks on, and I was screaming into the mask, eject, eject, eject. And Arvind was sort of, dazed. The environment is quite hostile. You suddenly have the wind screaming in at you, where from it was relatively silent till the canopy was blown. And also, the moment the canopy blew in, misting started because cold air used to come into the cockpit and sort of, condense all over you, all on the head and everything else. I was sort of indicating to Arvind to, pull the handle, which was, between his between his thighs. And finally, he did pull it just before I was actually trying to pull it for him.
Hmm.
And
And the Kiran has a individual ejection, so you both have to eject separately. There's no sequence to it.
there's no sequence to it. It's a manual ejection. The Even the canopy had to be blown off manually by a lever which is placed between the two of us. And once I blew off the canopy, the since we couldn't talk to each other, uh, it was actually silence between the two of us. I was screaming, but he couldn't hear me, and I was about to pull his handle when he pulled his handle himself. And it was very important for me to get him out before I went. The captain should have been the last person out, so
Absolutely.
that's the way it
Hmm.
works. So fortunately, he pulled just before I could actually reach for his handle. He pulled the handle. He went out, and I immediately ejected because things were now getting very tight. We were like just about maybe a 200 or 300 feet above the ground when all this
Oh,
finished.
really? My
Oh yes,
goodness. Oh,
I think we were really lucky. The aircraft fell just about maybe 100 yards in front of me and exploded there. So it was like it was like something which is spectacular. But I remember I was below Arvind, but I could see him with in the corners of my eye with his parachute open and coming down. And in next to no time, I hit the ground. I mean, I don't even recollect the float. I just remember ejecting, and the next thing was like I was hitting the ground. So it was like it was close. It was really close. But what was amazing was within minutes we had Avro on top of us, which was definitely from AST, and another 5, 7, 8 minutes later there was a helicopter, and which was probably diverted from Yalanka. And then in about 15, 20 minutes, our own helicopter came and landed. Two of them landed just next to us, and we were recovered in no time. And we were like sort of hauled into AST. And the first thing I did was I rushed to the phone and called up my wife to tell her that don't get worried. I am absolutely fit and fine and safe. Don't get upset by any rumor or anybody telling you anything
right,
different.
right, 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 right.
So
Wow.
that's the way it was. And
Amazing. Did you have any injuries from the ejections?
yes, in the sense, as I exited the aircraft, I felt as if my feet were, the feeling you get when you take off your shoes after a long day.
Yeah.
I got that feeling as if, cool air was getting into my shoes. What had actually happened, the flying boots, that is, what had actually happened was the soles of both the shoes had flown away in the ejection sequence. So I was like, I had just the boot upper on me, and I was on my socks when I landed up into on the barren hillside. So you can imagine the sort of, uh,
Uh,
uh, you know,
thorns and
yeah,
nettles and all that.
and the pilot parachute is rather small in size, because it has to fit into the headrest of an aircraft. So it has a fairly large rate of descent as compared to the normal parachutes which are used for
Mm, right. Para
civilian
jumping or
application,
something.
para jumping. So this
Right,
is a little
right.
smaller in size.
Mm,
So it
mm,
sort of gives you a hard thud, and on top of that, without shoes, it makes a lot of difference.
right,
So
right. Oh, wow. Great. Let's talk about the Tejas. You flew the chase on the first flight, and then you were involved with a lot of the test flying of TD1. So just love to hear about those experiences of the leading up to the first flight and the first flight and those initial flights. And you've seen the aircraft come into service when you were in senior rank. So just love to hear your thoughts on the Tejas, your experiences with Tejas, your evaluation of Tejas, as well as our own indigenous fighter aircraft development capabilities, given of what we have in the pipeline coming down.
the Tejas 2B was more than an aircraft. It was the entire process of making it that I was involved in. I was in the Tejas aircraft for almost 7 years before it took first flight. So I was, other than about a gap of about 2 or 3 years where I left for back to the squadron. When I came back in 1999 after the Kargil operations, the aircraft was almost there. It was undergoing its ground checks, and we are yet to start taxiing it. And therefore, the software, the fly-by-wire software, is at that time being evaluated both on the uh, real-time simulator at ADE as well as in the Ironbird.
Hmm. You had been involved with some of the calspine testing also, isn't it, sir?
That's right. That's right. Both Rajiv Kotial, me, and Uday Shankar, along with uh,
Rakesh Sharma also.
Rakesh Sharma and Baldi, we were the uh, pilot and the flight test engineer, which were doing this work at Calspan. We initially trained at in the United Kingdom at Cranwell, where we had a course with Calspan at the International Test Pilot School there, followed by which we flew the Learjet 25 out of out of this Cranfield, and thereafter we went to Buffalo, did some more training. We then started flying the LCA flight control law on the NT-33, which was a variable stability T-33 aircraft, again operated by Calspan. And therefore these were these are the sort of small steps that went in to finally make the Tejas what it is today. These were the early days, and therefore we were operating in an environment where we did not know what was uh, actually what was happening, in the sense we had to sort of listen to other people and hear them tell us about what were their experiences. We were closely monitoring what was happening on other fighter aircraft which were then being developed. Like, for example, the Gripen, it had suffered some issues in the fly-by-wire systems, especially in
Right.
regards to its mini stick in the landing phase as well as in the up and away phase, which had resulted in two ejections, one after the other. The first ejection was on its third or fourth flight, and the second ejection was in a demonstration over Stockholm. So all these were in the back of our mind, and we sort of were, really looking out for any abnormalities or any other sort of features which would result in getting us problems later. However, we also were fully involved in the control law development in terms of the sort of slopes that we required and the sort of safety features that we desired. All of this went into making the LCA what it is today. And I think everybody who's flown the LCA will admit that the control laws are really good. It behaves beautifully. The aircraft flies just as well as the Mirage 2000 does. I
That's
think
what everybody has said, yeah.
exactly, and especially in the landing phase, I think the LCA is probably better than the Mirage, as it is far more pilot friendly and that much less prone to getting into any sort of dangerous situation. So, in all, I think it was a great learning experience. It was a great ability to sort of put your knowledge of what you have done in the past into the aircraft and its capability, decide upon the logic for safety systems, decide upon the fail-safe logic for many systems. We were involved in every facet of the aircraft. I recollect the number of changes that we brought about, especially during real-time testing. Uh, Rajiv Kotial, Uday Shankar, and I, we used to sit for hours together, deciding things. You know, doing and redoing the test procedures to sort of get a feel on what exactly would be the best way to do it. And thereafter, in the Iron Word, we brought about a number of changes. The sort of requirements that we called upon, so that there had to be software changes to make good our requirements. All these took time, and since we were doing it for the first time and we were operating in territories in which we were not very familiar with, we followed what I would say was a very safe methodology of testing, retesting, and then thereafter only agreeing it to be put into the aircraft. Even on the last, I remember when final flight test review was being carried out, the fly-by-wire system, as pilots, we asked for changes. And because we had seen that during the uh, EMI EMC testing, there had been an occasion where, on operating of of the undercarriage, the entire fly-by-wire system had sort of collapsed.
Oh,
And we said that this is unacceptable. We would require some additional safety measures in terms of hardware changes to make sure that such a problem did not reoccur. We asked for it and we got it. I think these were all the sort of steps which we followed to get to where we did. And you may recollect that the first 12 sorties flown on TD1 were all flown with fixed gains,
fixed
because
gains, correct,
yeah,
right.
because we were not sure of the air data system. In a fly-by-wire aircraft, it is essential to have good air data uh, from the various sensors on the aircraft. And since they could not be calibrated until you actually did get airborne, and we didn't have a flight test group in the true sense of the word, we were getting data which could probably be erroneous and could really result in serious issues. Therefore, we flew in fixed gain. Now, that itself was a challenge. The aircraft did not have any mechanical backup, and nor did it have an electronic or software backup to the flight control existing laws. So, therefore, there was no backup. The Mirage had a backup. The F-16 has a backup, but the LCA was a true quadruplex digital fly-by-wire without backup. So therefore, to that extent, we had to be extra safe. We had to be that much more careful, and there was a lot of risk involved, which today, looking back, probably was excessively cautious. But I think that was the way it was because we were doing it for the first time.
Right, right, right. So tell us about that first flight where you were flying chase, and then your first flight in the Tejas. What were
The
those
first
like?
flight was, I was the standby pilot, in the sense, if Rajiv Kotial felt uneasy or sort of did not get his medicals through, I would have been the first flight
Right,
flight.
correct.
So to
Yeah,
that extent, we both practiced together. Well, we had done our high speed taxi, low speed taxi, and all the other things, and we were fairly conversant with the aircraft cockpit and everything else. Uh, and it was a very exciting time. We had the whole of the Indian Air Force, the Air Chief himself with us for the briefing. He was flying with us in the second Mirage 2000, along with Tarun Banerjee, who had also joined NFTC about a year ago. And Rajiv Kotial was in the light combat aircraft TD1, which was called KH 2001. KH in honor of Kota Hari Narayanan, and 2001 because that was the year which we were getting airborne, the 4th of January. Uh, we got together very early. I remember the sort of tense environment in the flight line, in the NFTC, where all the big wigs had gathered to see us off. The chief himself was there. He had put his G suit on, and we all walked to the aircraft. Being chased, we were the first to get airborne. That is Banjo and I. Banjo was in the front seat with Air, Chief Marshal Tipnis in the rear, and I was in the front seat of the lead chase with Soggy Krishna in the rear. Soggy had a video camera with him, while I had a Sony digital handycam with me, which we uh, which took the sortie, the flight. You remember, there's a photograph of the Tejas on long finals that is taken
yeah,
by
yeah.
me with the
Right.
Mirage 2000 on autopilot. While
Okay.
Soggy was
Wow.
doing the filming,
Right, right.
I quickly pulled out the uh, digital camera out of my pocket, quickly snapped it and put it back, and then got back to my primary job, that was to make sure that I continued to chase Koti right down to touchdown.
Right, right. And so when there was telemetry loss, what were you feeling at that time? And I think you were then moved in close and you inspected the aircraft for any leaks and things like that, isn't it?
That was something which we had to do even otherwise, even if there was telemetry. Telemetry loss was totally unexpected, and probably the reason for this was that we had not had another aircraft telemetered which this telemetry system could practice on. we directly went to the LCA for the first flight was with a aircraft for telemetered for the first time, and therefore there was some interference from some additional transmitter somewhere in the nearby industrial area at Marathali or beyond, which resulted in us losing telemetry. So therefore, we were all now eyes down to watch the LCA to see if there was any leaks or some sort of, you know, visible trail of any possible failure. We were barely 17 minutes in the air, so the loss of telemetry was definitely reason for the short time of the first flight. Uh, the undercarriage was kept down for the first flight, and therefore we went through the paces quite fast. And we just sort of did a very loose and wide circuit heading south over Krishnagiri, Hosur, that area, and then came in and landed on runway 09. Uh, I was thrown in close proximity to the LCA, giving him speed readout. The LCA was calibrated in kilometers per hour, while the Mirage 2000 LCA today is now in knots and feet. But at
Right.
that point in time, the ASR requirement was for having it in the
Oh,
metric
oh,
units. So the Mirage is calibrated in knots and feet, while the LCA was then in kilometers per hour and meters. So we had a table which quickly converted, and I could read out down to the last digit as to what was the speed, so that Koti could quickly look up. And I was giving Koti speeds in kilometers per hour. So I was reading out from my instruments and from my head up the speeds and knots. We had a lookup table which we had sort of pasted on the windshield, which I could quickly, correlate to and call out these numbers. And if you have watched the video, which is there on YouTube, you would find me calling out in kilometers per hour, even though I was flying the Mirage.
mm,
And
okay, got
I
it.
think it went wonderfully. The first flight was truly amazing. We had uh, nothing went wrong. Everything worked exactly as per what we had planned on the book, except for the telemetry, which was a letdown, and probably happened because we had not practiced with another aircraft which had telemetry to make sure that our procedures were right. Uh, but that was what it was, and what.
How about your first flight? So a few flights later, I think you flew TD1 for the first time, isn't it?
That's right. 6 flights later, I took up TD1 for the first flight, and some of the exciting things I did was, firstly, we did a tower flyby for calibrating the air data system, which required you to go down the runway at a height of about 20 to 30 meters, and with a camera which would sort of record your height in relation to an object across the air traffic control, some water tanks which were marked. So therefore, your exact height was being monitored on camera, and at the same time your instruments were being telemetered as well as being recorded on a timestamp. So later, in the after you landed back, these could be compared to exactly find out what exactly was the errors in the calibration of the air data system. Now this involved continuously flying the aircraft from low speeds from about 350 kilometers to high speeds at that time of about 700 kilometers, 20 meters off the runway.
Oh boy,
So this was something very exciting. So you were screaming down the runway,
that early in the
exactly. And
yeah,
remember, this was fixed gain, fixed
yeah,
gain loss. Today, if the aircraft were to get into fixed gain, it's only allowed gentle roll maneuvers. So that is the sort of challenges which we had at that time. Fixed gain. I don't think today, if the LCA had to go into fixed gain, they would immediately come in and land. It would have been an emergency in the true sense of
emergency,
the word.
right?
But there we were flying at 20 meters, screaming down the runway from one dumbbell to other at 350, 400, 450, 500, 550, 600, at all of these speeds to sort of get the table right. Uh, I was also on the 12th sortie, that is the 12th sortie of the LCA. I did a full roll, a 360
Okay,
degree roll. Uh,
fascinating.
so this was done this is the last sortie of the first phase of flight testing of TD1.
What was your G limit at that time, sir? It was
It was
two,
about
two and a half,
3G. 3G.
3G. Yeah,
3G was what was
okay.
the number, and the 360 roll is not something which is very uh, difficult or any maneuver like that. But the fact was that it was a challenge from the fixed gain side.
Hmm.
in the sense it would probably never even be called for today if you had a fixed gain requirement. But be that it may, to the confidence of the designer definitely went up by leaps and bounds, and this role was recorded on video. And at that time, it was like a big boost to the program that we had reached a stage that we could roll the aircraft on its 12th flight.
On a 12th flight. Wow.
That too still in fixed gain. So I think they were very exciting days, Gana. I mean,
Visual to before the bridge line. Just need 70, roger, report time southeast, connect, for the midway, and field selected.
I know you've watched the aircraft subsequently, sir, and of course now it's in operational service with full operational clearance and things like that. So it must be for you professionally tremendous satisfaction to have, from the first line of code of the control law to an operational aircraft, see that in your career.
absolutely. It was a really amazing time. In 2012, I came back to AST as an Air Vice Marshal, and I flew the LCA once again, single seat. Uh, did a quick sortie in the RTS, and then got airborne in the single seat LCA. At that time, it was one of the PV series, I think PV4 or PV3. I'm not very certain. I don't remember. It's there in my logbook somewhere. But I did two sorties. I went supersonic in one of them. Uh, this was with the full up control law, not fully opened out as it is today, but with fairly large envelopes. Uh, had a wonderful time throwing the aircraft around. I flew about three sorties at that time as the commandant of AST. And then subsequently, the aircraft reached the squadrons over the years. In 2016, I think the first squadron was set up. And then I flew the LCA once again, single seat, uh, as the deputy chief of the Air Force, as an air marshal.
Uh-huh. Right. You were also SASO Southern Air Command, and was it under your command at that time?
No, the squadron had yet to be inducted at
Okay.
Sulur, and
Mm.
the squadron had yet to be formed at that time. I was SASO as SASO of Southern Air Command for about just about 3 or 4 months, and at that period, the squadron had yet to be formed. It was in 2015.
Okay.
So I didn't have that opportunity then, but later as the deputy chief, I had a chance and made good use of it. I flew the light combat aircraft again. So that was my last sortie on it. This was the series production aircraft number 7, which had just rolled out of the production line about, I understand, about a week before, and it had just about flown about 4 or 5 sorties, and this was probably the sixth sortie. So once again, chance to see the systems. Uh, over this period, you really require to study up on what were the changes, and that was the challenge. With a senior rank and position, you did not have much
You got
time to
so much
spend
else.
over.
Yeah.
But I made it a point to get all the literature across, all the pilot's notes and manuals across to Delhi. Went through them, and then when I did come and flew with 45 Squadron, I was fairly confident that everything was in order, and I wouldn't, make a fool of myself. That's very
Right.
important when you're a senior officer.
Yes, yes. Lovely. And so, so I've been asking all the test pilots who've been involved with this that, given the threat environment in the subcontinent, as a squadron pilot going into battle with on this platform, what's your assessment of its operational effectiveness and its ability to hold its own?
Uh, you must remember that the LCA was designed as a replacement for the MiG-21. The ASR was, if I remember the number, was 2 of 85. So the aircraft was pitched around uh, a replacement to the MiG-21. And therefore, we did not think as big as we probably should. The aircraft did not have sufficient fuel even today to realize the ASR which we had set about in 1985. So therefore, there was this problem that we had a lesser fuel than what is really desirable, and we also had this problem that we did not have any onboard electronic warfare capability other than the RWR and chaff and flare. So this was some sort of a issue with the first series of the LCA Mark One, so to speak, 40 of which are have been ordered. In subsequent years, we have ordered another 83 more LCA Mark 1As, which will overcome these deficiencies to a certain extent. The fuel, however, will remain not as much as we would like to, and therefore it will just have the same sort of legs which the LCA Mark 1 has. Uh, the problem of, I would say, stems from the fact that in designing the light combat aircraft, the factor of safety that we took in to realize what we were uh, trying to do resulted in excessive weight. And the structure, therefore, could not be really optimized to carry the sort of fuel that the aircraft really requires. I think this was the first time that we were doing it, and the people who were doing it probably did not have the sort of experience that we have today. I'm sure if we were to design the LCA once again and redesign it to, we would definitely do a much better job of it than what we did in the past. So therefore, there is this learning curve, which is, something which we cannot forget or cannot sort of skip over, irrespective of how much we collaborate with anybody or with any other agency or any other uh, big company, a foreign company. We have to learn some things on our own, and that's where the challenge lies: how quickly we do it and how fast we are on the uptake to make things happen in our country. I think we are in the right path, uh, though our pace is a bit on the slower side, and probably the focus somewhat shifts once in a while. But I think that's the way we should be doing things. The aircraft is capable of, if as a replacement to the MiG-21, I think if you were to take a choice, I think it's definitely capable replacement to the MiG-21. But is it the replacement to what we require today? I think it's probably deficient in many ways. And I think the LCA Mark II and the other aircraft which are probably in the pipeline will probably be exactly what we want.
Correct. I think what's important is to continue to build on the capabilities that have already been developed through this program, and not, you know, not allow that
Exactly.
sort of hiatus that we had between the Marut and the LCA.
Exactly. We had a 40-year hiatus between first flight of the Marut and first flight of the LCA. The one aircraft, the Marut HF-24, flew in 1961, and here is the LCA 40 years later in 2001 flying once again. So not only the generation of designers of the 1960s, even their children would have retired by the time their grandchildren were designing the light combat aircraft. So that is a sort of, you know, sort of period of time which we have skipped over, resulting in us learning and relearning everything from scratch.
So can you talk a little bit about engine development? Because I think that's, the Uttam radar has come in, and that's probably addressed the radar as a weakness, but engine still remains a problem. What is the big challenge? Why is it so difficult to develop an engine for something like the LCA?
Uh, I think if the aircraft airframe that is could be developed, and if it's of a particular generation, engine technology is probably far more high technology than the aircraft itself. Let me give you some numbers. You see, an engine is requires to be a modern turbine jet engine requires to be operating at about 10,000 rpm, and at temperatures which are excessively high, approaching close to 1800 degrees centigrade or higher at the hot ends. Now you're rotating at very high speed and you've got very high temperatures. Metallurgy, the cooling mechanisms, the sort of software required to make sure that you do not stall the engine during the entire flight envelope of the aircraft. All of these are very challenging facets of engine development. Uh, it's We have been attempting since 1959, when GTRE was formed, to make a jet engine for ourselves. We have dabbled with the Orpheus engine, which was there on the NAT. We have sort of made an afterburn for it at GTRE. GTRE is its, on its own trying to develop other smaller engines, and even the Kaveri. We have not focused on it the way we should have. Being a government organization from DRDO side, doing a particular task, uh, I think probably we did not gather the correct set of people and the correct set of capabilities and focused on it fully, resulting in us slipping continuously in what we are attempting to do. Uh, the sort of monies required to develop an engine we have not put in. And I think because of all this, despite all our efforts to date, we have not reached a stage at where we can say that we are successfully developed an engine which can get airborne in a fighter aircraft, a single engine fighter aircraft. Uh, I think the challenge here lies that just as we are taking two steps, we are probably going one step back, while the rest of the world, in technology terms, is moving four steps forward. So the sort of gap which is sort of slowly being generated between where we are and where the rest of the world is fairly huge. To my mind, there are just about three or four engine developers in the entire world who have mastered jet engine technology. Pratt and Whitney and General Electric in the United States, Rolls Royce in the United Kingdom, uh, Safran in France, and that's about it. I wouldn't put the Russian engines in the same league as the modern Western engines. They are definitely not a patch in terms of longevity or reliability. Uh, the developments by China and some of the other countries, including MTU of Germany, they are not in the same league as what the products that come out of Pratt and Whitney, GE, Rolls Royce, and Safran, both in the commercial as well as in the military fields. Uh, Given this fact, if we have to catch up, to my mind, I think we would have to, a certain extent, jump this technology gap by intelligently tying up with the existing players to develop something which we require, and therefore indigenizing it to the extent that we gather a capability which we need. I think this is the need of the hour, and how we do it and how quickly we grasp this problem and set our focus on it and solve it would be the challenge which we face. There have been, paper reports which I have been reading about, DRDO collaborating with uh, some other foreign OEMs to develop an engine for ourselves for the AMCA. There have been reports which I have been reading of the AMCA coming out in two flavors. uh, Phase one with the existing GE 414 engine, and phase two with our own engine. Uh, I do not have much information about what is actually happening, but if you were to look at the budgeting, to my mind, there has not been any budget provisions for such an undertaking. It's until the money is out up front and on the table that we can start, talking about what we are doing. At the moment, this is all wishful thinking by people who sort of, feel that we should be here and there. But the fact is, money has not yet been put on the table to go the way we want to.
Hmm, understood.
And these are huge sums of money. This is not something which is, sort of easily digestible. We are talking about $1 billion or maybe more, which have to be sort of put up front, and then we have to put in the right set of people. We have to attract talent and keep them together to realize our national uh, dream to have a jet engine of our own.
So, this is a interesting segue to a point about you've spent a lot of time testing systems with the Israelis. You were the DA in Israel. It's a small country, but it punches significantly above its weight. Based on your experiences and interactions, what do you think they're doing right, doing differently that allows them this prowess?
I think, firstly, being a small country has certain advantages They do not get into things which they shouldn't be doing. Like, for example, they look at what do they have as raw materials. They do not have iron ore. They do not have all the ingredients required to make cars. So they do not make cars. They do not make a single car of their own. All the cars that they have comes from uh, other countries. They import them. Israel focus on low volume high tech. They do not touch upon high volume high tech. High volume high tech, I mean things like, say, a digital camera, which is
Consumer
for the consumer
electronics.
electronics, like the Canon latest series or the Nikon latest series, which are produced in Japan and in many other countries. They do not focus on high volume, high tech, like the latest type of television set, but they focus on low volume, high tech, like cameras for spacecrafts, cameras for uh, military applications, which are required in the few hundreds rather than the few 10,000s. So their focus is on niche fields, which gives them the sort of advantage that they desire. Now, given this focus on a national basis and their ability to make sure that what is required by them gets farmed out to both the private industries as well as public players simultaneously. I think that's where the Israeli advantages come from. They are able to gather all the resources uh, and focus them at the right place. Moreover, their technicians, their people, their managers have combat experience to a certain amount, and therefore, before they do get into the field of manufacturing and developing and designing things, they have been at it with rifles and bayonets and probably even flying fighter aircrafts in the field. So when they get a chance to now start developing or being involved with technology, their operational experience sort of mingles with their existing technology, and they can concoct and sort of make things which are ideally suitable for achieving what they want to do.
Got it.
I think that's where the sort of advantage Israel has. Conscription is universal. All women have to serve for 2 years, and men have to serve for 3 years minimum. Thus, they get a head up on what is the requirement in the field. Today, a lady who is at a managerial position in a firm would have a daughter probably serving in a field unit.
Right.
So she has got a sort of a stake in what she develops for her child, and she's sort of interacting with them, learning up, and she herself has some knowledge of what has happened in the past, or what are the sort of situations that you feel in, you operate in, and then you with that you have a new technological capability just being sort of invented. You sort of quickly sort of marry up how it could be slotted into this particular for an advantage.
Mhm.
Individual issue before the visualize. Just need 70, like your report type is southeast, Greenwich, E54, come midway, and you will select it.
Folks, that's all we have time for this week. Marshal Nambiar and I spent almost 2 hours and 15 minutes speaking about various things. And the entire second half, for which you have to join me next week, is about his experiences in Kargil. So he'll put us in the cockpit with him on that fateful day in June when he delivered that laser guided bomb to the top of Tiger Hill. Join me then, but till then, stay safe. Jai Hind.